My name is Brian Jack. I'm an Associate Professor of Historical Studies. It's my pleasure today to welcome you to the formal opening of the Forks of the Road Internal Slave Trade exhibit and introduce you to our speaker, Mr. Sarah Boxley, creator of the exhibit. But first, on behalf of Professors Rowena McClinton and Jessica Harris, I'd like to thank Dean Regina McBride and the library staff for graciously hosting the exhibit for this academic year. I'd also like to thank Dean Greg Budsbud and the College of Arts and Sciences for the targeted funding initiative that's making the exhibit and today's presentation possible. Bringing to today's presentation and our speaker. The internal slave trade, the forced migration of African Americans from the Upper South to the Deep South, has been called slavery's Trail of Tears. But in actuality, as historian Edward Bolton notes, this forced resettlement was 20 times larger than the campaign to drive Native Americans out of the Southeast. Involving the forced migration of over 1 million people. It was bigger than the immigration of Jews into the United States during the 19th century, and it was bigger than the wagon train migration to the West. This movement lasted longer and grabbed up more people than any other migration in North America before 1900. Yet until recently, outside of a few historians, this history has been hidden. Thanks to, in no small part, to the work done by today's speaker, this history is hidden no more. A November 2015 article in Smithsonian Magazine calls Mr. Sarah Boxley, quote, the man in the South who's done the most to call attention to the slave trail. Mr. Boxley himself said, I'm drafted by the inactivity of others to do history work. I want to resurrect the history of the enslavement trade, and for 20 years, that's where I've focused. His work has been cited by historians Edward Ball, Edward Baptist, and many others, and his Forks of the Road exhibit has appeared at numerous campuses in California as well as at Purdue University. We're excited to host the exhibit here at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. After Mr. Boxley's presentation, we'll have time for questions and answers, and we hope to get a good dialogue going. So I now present Mr. Sarah Boxley.
Wow. Thank you very much, Professor Jack. A couple corrections. The museum has the exhibit. It debuted at Purdue in 2012, and it was in the hands of a friend of mine in Indianapolis who showed it around for Kwanzaa and some of the other, but it hadn't been to California yet.
Oh,
and, that's all right. And you cannot call me Mr. Sarah. My title, elder, is an ancient Egyptian terminology, Ser, S-E-R. That means elder, like Baba and some of the other Western African, Nana in Zimbabwe, Ghana, in this case it would be Sakuru in Zimbabwe. And that's part of the African tradition of giving respect to elders and classifying the various levels of age groups so that people have their responsibilities. And of course, the elder responsibility is very heavy. Basically, that's what I'm doing in Natchez, Mississippi, my town, hometown, where I was earthed. I came into the world out of my mother's womb in Natchez, Mississippi in 1939. Gave me the name that she had at that time, Boxley. Boxley is English, and it goes back to, it's my slave name. It ties us to the history of chattel slavery in America. And it goes into England. Boxley is a place where they make boxes in England, and I have nothing to do with that. And so all I'm doing is basically carrying a label that makes the connection to chattel slavery in America and actually Spotsylvania, Virginia, where a whole bunch of white folks named Boxleys are as such. So my whole title is Ser, S-E-R, Sesh, S-E-S-H-S-H, Ab, A-B, then H-E-T-E-R, Ser, Sesh, Ab, Heter. That's an ancient Egyptian or Kemetic name which means boundless joy unites us. And that's a name that I should have been given when I took my first breath, because in the African tradition of naming, there are those who have the skills and the science to know what the elements and the conditions in the universe is all about. And also the naming will tell the community what spirit is in this vehicle called the body. And when you call that name out, you vibrate it, you energize it, and what have you. And so the science of naming is one of the things that we're struggling with in this whole identity in the Western world. And I'm so happy to be here and see you all. Just like takes me back to California, as Professor Jack said, when I spent my years of tuning up and learning and becoming a well-tuned humanity activist and what have you. I come out of the anti-poverty program back in the 60s, mid-60s, when it was a time when we had to, in California, open up the universities so that there would be opportunities, when we would have to create job opportunities, living places where you could just live where you want to, because I don't care if you were Asian, Indian, Mexican, Hispanic, Latino, Cubana, any of those. We were all concentrated in small areas and restricted in California. There were these ghettos, or ghettos. Basically, that's a Jewish term for being concentrated in certain areas and what have you. And so everybody in California wasn't, how did I have that? BBB, black, bleached blonde with a sport outfit and a gold chain and driving a Mercedes. That came along much later. There was actually discrimination in housing and education and employment and all those things in California. So that's where I sharpened my tools in terms of activism. And it was my objective when I left Mississippi in 1960 to go to California and wound up somehow playing professional football. And when I got there, I realized that the year before, when I hurt my knees, injured, the little halfbacks coming along, blocking your knees all the time, and I got injured and didn't have enough money. We were a very poor family, female head of household, no funds to go to college, no funds to go to the doctor, so I had to get well on my own. And so going to California, the dream of playing football was shattered when I went out for football in the city called Valley Joe. I'm coming from Mississippi and I'm going to Valley Joe, California, which winds up being Vallejo, and if you're speaking Spanish, it's Vallejo. And anyway, that's where I landed in California. So the idea of going to California, getting a good job, and getting all of the things that white men had that we were denied the opportunity to have in Mississippi. The task of doing that I was on my way. Once I failed the football physical, I took a hard cry and went to work for the post office, got married, had a son. By the time John F. Kennedy was killed, that's how I tell when his birthday is coming up. And anyway, in 1963, someone in some dark energy, some dark spirit in a person in a vehicle planted a bomb in the church in Birmingham and killed 4 little innocent black children. And at that time, my life passed in front of my face like a movie, the frames in the movie, entire life of whatever it was going to be and look like. And that changed me away from the pursuit of materialism, the pursuit of the American dream, etc., etc. And it turned me into a person who wanted to know, they didn't just kill 4 black girls to me, 4 little innocent children. They killed black. And I wanted to know what was it that black, it was all about, that we had to catch all of this hell in America. And it forced me to start looking back black, to find out what we all about as black people. And over the years, it took me all the way back to Africa, all the way back up the Nile Valley, let's see, it's down north and up south, all the way up south to the mountain of the moon around Uganda and places like that, according to the story, to find out where Hugh man and Hugh woman, I said hue, color, originated. And all of that 4,100 mile journey down north, developing the tenets for civilization, I began to study and read and look at all that, and it begins to fill me with the connection. All of the black people, Negroes, colored, African Americans, American Africans, and whatever else, they're sitting in here. We are the sum total of all black people that ever lived in the world. We are the sum total. We are the bottom line. Okay? That's real serious. We are the bottom line of all the black people that ever lived over the millions of years and thousands of years in the world. We're it. So we have a mission in the time, and we find our mission and direction in that, with that understanding. If we look at the history that we have as a people of what we've done, how they've done it, who did it, and what the contributions were to America, to the society, to the world, and who has borrowed, stolen, copied, imitated, whatever it might be in their I don't want to pick in their Greek societies, in their Christian societies, in their Asian societies, East Indian societies, Chinese society, all of those kinds of Native American societies. At the bottom of all of that is African people, culture, and tradition, what have you, okay? So that gives me the kind of ammunition that I need, especially to go back home to my Mississippi, where they have a huge tourism industry where they roll out in the spring people in hoop skirts and dress up in Confederate uniform and have pageants and ceremonies that relive days gone with the wind. Okay, every elementary student and high school student, what have you, in my little small town of 18,000 people that's white, know that story. They've been part of the pageant. They've been part of the tourism industry and what have you. And so when I left California in 1995, I was on my way to get the hell out of America. I was moving. I had been fed up with America, and I'm moving to Africa. So I go home to Natchez and drop all of my collections and books and everything else that I have in the old household. And of course, when I left in 1960, I'm definitely what you would call in a Negro, let's see how we get it in Spanish, Negro mentality. That is, I don't know who I am. I don't know what history I belong to, whatever the case might be. And certainly, as I say, I'm imitating the white folks and what they got going on and what they had going on that I couldn't be a part of. Okay, so that meant that I didn't understand all of this, what do they call it, tourism that was going on in Natchez that made it look like white people did all of the development by themselves. Let me say that again, because that's the basis of what I've been doing for the last 21 years in Natchez. They had a tourism industry that peddled the history off of the backs that had been made off the backs of our ancestors through enslavement and Jim Crow and any other kind of way, low wages and after slavery, still segregation. The white folks couldn't go to school with us when I was going, high school. They couldn't go to college with us. The white folks couldn't drink out of the water fountain we drank out of. The white folks couldn't sit upstairs with us in the movie where we sat. You see how I'm doing that? They have it, they supposedly were segregating us from them, but it's just the other way around. They were segregating themselves from us as such, and they missed out on a lot of experience and what have you. But anyway, that didn't sit well with a lot of people telling us, colored over here, water fountain. Can you imagine a colored toilet? All that shit going down the same drain. A lot of you might have read about this, but I had to live through this stuff. And the whole idea of having the right to vote, uh, uh, working in the government, whatever it is that we wanted to do that people can do today somewhat. And if you were uppity and tried to do that back before the civil rights move, you had to get out of Natchez and other parts of the South and head up 55, 57 to Chicago, Mississippi up north. You had to get out of that, Detroit, Chicago, those kinds of places. So when I get back home from California, headed to Africa, I'm very familiar now with the history of African people, our history as a people, and I'm very familiar with the history of Europeans. Very familiar with it, have a good understanding behind it. And there is this huge tourism industry going on in Natchez that makes it look like white folks did everything by themselves. And I'm saying, the spirit, the ancestor said to me, you cannot go to Africa. Who will tell our story? Who is telling our story? And as a result, I began to look around in Natchez for a story to come back. I started something what was called the Equal History. I tried to take off on Jesse Jackson and all of those other things that they had back, the catch-all terms back there. I started something called Equal History Commemoration, okay? And that was a catch-all phrase, and the objective of Equal History Commemoration was to overcome, I'm saying this is the failure of the civil rights movement, overcome white folks making it look like they did everything all by themselves. So the next problem is, well, how do I come up with an argument? What do I use as an equalizer? And I kept looking for an equalizer, and in some of the, there was a professor from California State University, Northridge, who would bring students down every year, and they'd get into the Adams County Courthouse records, and they would write masters and BAs and PhD, but at the same time, they were digging up all this history, and the professor wrote a book called The Black Experience in Natchez, 1720 to 1880. And in that book, there was something called, he dealt with slavery, chattel slavery. And by the way, we want to define slavery. Never, ever, ever compare the enslavement of African people to anybody else, whatever that is that they say was enslavement. Because what we have in the American system and in the Atlantic system is what we call chattel slavery. Chattel, C-H-A-T-T-E-L. Okay, chattel slavery has its roots in legal law in Greece and Rome. And what happens when the Europeans invade this part of the country and they get lost and they find a way to, lost their way to Barbados and other places, and then decided to invade the Red Nation people's country and set up what was to become America, named it after Vespucci, how do we say, what, Vespucci or something like America? And set it up. So we have this understanding that if in fact you are going to tell a story and use the tourism industry and the preservation of buildings and bricks, I call them brick bigots. You know, I'm building off of my experience in California, because we had the I guess the logging industry and you know, the people in California who wouldn't solve problems in the hood and the communities, what have you. All of a sudden, these liberal people went out to become environmentalists. They wanted to clean up the ocean front and creeks, and they wanted to save the animals and what have you. So we call them environmental bigots. And when I get to Natchez and you have all of these historic Natchez Foundation and other people who have preserved all of these buildings that tell the story of white folks and what have you, I call them brick bigots. And I'm interested in the human story. And so what do I do to try to find something to overcome or to neutralize this story? And in Professor Davis' book is this story about chattel slavery and a place called the Forks of the Road. Oh, that spirit said, this is it. I got it. The Forks of the Road was a site in Natchez after the, first of all, Natchez has always been a destination for people who were trying to make new kingdoms or new empires, to make new wealth, and some of them never had any wealth, and all of those people migrated to the southwest, to the southern states. Before the Europeans or the American whites or what have you go to the southern states, the only people down there are the Red Nation people, okay? Mississippi, Arkansas, and when the French come into New Orleans in the early 1700s, I think they'll have their 300th anniversary in 1718 or something of that sort. The only folks that there were, the Choctaw or the Homochitto, and these are names now, the Takapas and all that. These are names of nations that no longer exist. The Natchez no longer exist. They got wiped out. Imagine that, getting wiped out for the planet. You know, there are some remnants of them, what have you. But that kind of movement to the south had taken place, according to Professor Ed Baptiste, and half has never been told. He does a good job of that, talking about these mega slavers who are so powerful in the U.S. Congress and in the eastern seaboard of the northern banking industry, finance, all the way to Europe. They're so powerful, and they want to expand their empires and whatever the case might be. So they had already been in Natchez before the enslavement at the forks of the road, the dealing at the forks of the road started. So you look at the 1700s, 1716, 1714, the French show up. The same French who were invading New Orleans invade Natchez. And today, this year, Natchez is celebrating its 300th anniversary. And they talked about, in that 300th anniversary, recognizing the French, the Spanish, the British, and the Americans. And I said, wow, look at these people. They're still doing it. They're still doing it. We've been in this place for 297 years of those 300. So I started saying, what about us Africans? What about us Africans? You can see what I'm doing with this program, or this objective of trying to make it overcome them making it look like themselves. So there's this Professor Davis statement and inclusion of something called the forks of the road. And I zero on it. I jump on it because, as the late Professor Asa Hillard would say, don't tell me some person history. You know, don't Martin Luther King me, Frederick Douglass me, John Coltrane me, or what have you. Tell me and show me a people's history. And I had been, for all of those years, looking at us as a people. You know, what have we done as a people, all the way back to. So it was really in my strength to begin to look at this thing from the standpoint of a people's history. And the Forks of the Road fit that category just perfect. It was about thousands and thousands of people who had been forced walked in captivity from not Illinois, well, maybe even Illinois, yeah, because Illinois didn't come clean until much later. I'm pretty sure that you found some history of chattel slavery in Illinois, but we want to go to the heart of where the stuff is in Baltimore, Delaware, in Maryland, and D.C. Despite all the Negroes in D.C. walking around thinking that they're up north somewhere, that's the South. That's the South. D.C., Maryland is the South. And our people who were brought down here were the sons, the daughters, the mothers, the fathers, the aunts, cousins of black folks who remained in that area and have ascended all over these years. We're the same family. There's 1/3 of us, so to speak, force brought from those areas, Georgia, the Carolinas, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, and taken to Arkansas, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, and enslaved there in the interest of growing new empires and what have you. So when the American Congress in 1808 or thereby 1807 passed a law to say you can't bring any more Africans in captivity, Oh, from places like this where the British operated in Ghana, West Africa. You can't bring any more captives from that place. Remember, our ancestors are not enslaved in Africa. They are captives. And then they are forced brought in captivity to the Americas and then enslaved. So try to look at and call our ancestors and talk about the term enslaved versus slavery or slave as such. Sometime I'll flip and say that. So anyway, when I chose the forks of the road and began to zero in on it, that meant I had to do what? I had to start reading. Couldn't go to the internet 25 years ago and find information about the forks of the road. The internet existed, but the information wasn't out, as Professor Jack just read about that. This was a hidden history. This was an untold history. Even today, people don't know about what started in the 1800s after Congress said that we're no longer going to have Africans in captivity brought to the Americas. But it continued on, even though it was legally it's hard to even say these terms, illegal. You know, it's hard to even give any credence to this term illegal, because in the first place they are ill getting our ancestors in captivity, and they have produced a system where people are participating in it for goodies and seduction for fake and powerless, what I call them, fake kingdoms. A powerless kingdom where you have convinced. Number one, you jumped in bed in Africa. The Portuguese were good at this, jumping in bed and producing a light-skinned or mulatto child who, when growing up, helped their invading father against their mother's people in Africa to do the dirty work and what have you. So there's all these systems that were put in place, or things that were put in place, that allowed for Africans to participate in this Atlantic enslavement trade. And remember, here's another one. I put it together. No European and Arab demand, no African supply. No Arab and European demand, which equals cause. No African supply, which is effect. Okay, always remember that. And also remember Europe being in economic straits, trying to get to India and Asia for the spices and herbs. They've been fighting with the Muslims for I don't know how long. The Muslims got a boycott on them in the Mediterranean Sea, so they sail west, thinking that they're going to fall off in the earth because the earth was square or something. They're going to fall off in the ocean. And they lose their way to West Africa, to the area off of Morocco and places like that. And they capture, the Portuguese are the first out of the box, and they capture some 20 or 30 Africans somewhere off of Morocco, and there's a fight to the death. We resisted. That's what my other exhibit deals with, the African origins, the Africans, European origins let's see, the African-European roots of the Underground Railroad. I have another exhibit that I did in 2001 that has traveled all over the country. So we have this understanding that the Europeans have always been able to divide and conquer. The Arabs have always been doing. I got good pictures and images of the Arabs in Africa raiding villages. They're black folks and dressed in Arabic clothes and got guns and all those kinds of things. So yeah, if you get stuck at that level, then you'll get into the argument of saying, I heard y'all sold yourself, you captured your own people. But if you see them with the clothing on, they're Arabs. They've been converted to Islam. Okay, they're the sons and daughters. Yeah, sure, there were people who were seduced to the goodies and what have you, but there was also people like Queen Nzinga who fought the Portuguese for 30 or 40 years to a standstill until they started killing her people, masses, and when she had to surrender with her. There are tons of examples in Africa where Africans fought back and defeated. I wish I had the opportunity to show you the picture in Zanzibar, in that area where the French operated as well, along with the Arabs and the Zanzibar captivity. Whatever. We have these Frenchmen with ropes around their necks being taken to the African king for trafficking in Africa. They hung them. These Frenchmen, they hung them. We don't get to see that kind of story. We don't get to see the story that much about the America's domestic enslavement trafficking, which is what the Forks of the Road speaks to the most in terms of in 1833, when the kingpin dealer from Alexandria, Virginia, 1315 Duke Street, that company called Franklin and Armfield set up a buy-in headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia, and they began to had agents go all over Virginia and into Maryland, what have you, scooping up our ancestors by hook, crook, or any other kind of place. Solomon Northrop? Okay, how many people saw Solomon Northrop? 12 years a slave. 12 years. Okay, about the same as the high schoolers. Okay, in terms of number, proportion, there were like 200 or 300 high schoolers, and proportionally about the same number here. The whole idea of Isaac Franklin and his shipping company and his partner John Armfield, who by marriage to an in-law, they are operating within the American borders, a long-distance enslavement selling operation. It's the biggest one in the country. By the time Isaac Franklin gets out of the business, he starts in 1819, and by 1845 or something, he is the wealthiest enslavement dealer, kingpin dealer in the country. Okay, so what am I saying? I'm saying once America says you cannot bring Africans from Africa for enslavement, and you can still bring them in from the Caribbean and other places. But with the advent of sugarcane, the planting of sugarcane, and the planting of cotton, the mechanization by machinery for processing sugarcane, the mechanization by machinery for cleaning cotton and baling it, it offers the opportunity now for people to become filthy, filthy, filthy rich. And so much wealth that in 1850, in Natchez alone, you had more millionaires per capita in Natchez than anywhere else in the world off of King Cotton. Okay, so with this external, supposedly stoppage of bringing African captives to the America, they turned to the need to have Africans to come and do sugar and do cotton, sugarcane and cotton. And so where are they now going to bring African descendants for enslavement? They're going to turn to professional long-distance traffickers bringing and capturing Africans in the eastern seaboard of Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, the Carolinas, Georgia, Florida, Missouri, Kentucky. And I have a list of the dealers in Missouri that I hope we can have. When are we supposed to stop this thing? At 5:30?
About 5:15 for questions.
Okay. All right. Okay. So here comes this huge proliferation of professional dealers who now, because sugar has become queen and cotton is king. You heard of King Cotton, right? Well, I also Queen Sugar, Princess Rice, and Prince Tobacco. That's what I give them in terms of my right. These history books have not gotten to you yet. It's in my computer and what have you. But those are the terminologies that I call it. And so you have this huge need for Africans to do all this work to produce all this wealth that you still see remnants of in Louisiana, Kentucky, and other places in buildings and street names, and you see the wealth that has generated the banking industries and on that has built America, for which people now go about their business trying to have a piece of America without even understanding how they had that opportunity to have a piece of America. So the 1808 embargo forces to meet the needs of the South, the growing needs, it forces people to look to these states that I've talked to, and they call that America's domestic enslavement trafficking. I'll do it this way: domestic, quote, slave, unquote, trade. Okay, that means from within the borders of America, getting a hold of some African descendants, no matter how, so that they can be sold to the South. You make a profit by snatching them and buying, and whatever the case, in the Eastern Seaboard. And of course, by then, in the expansions, because you remember there's always this expansion going on, especially by the slavery crats, the mega slavers and what have you. They have expanded across the Allegheny Mountains or something, over into Missouri and Kentucky. They're growing tobacco and whatever else they grow up through this area. And then they also have expanded to the Southwest, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas. Matter of fact, they went to a fight very early, a war in Texas called the 1836 Battle of the Alamo and whatever. And there are those of us who say, forget the Alamo, remember Mexico. And of course, there's another reason to remember Mexico, is in the Battle of Pueblo around what they call Cinco de Mayo in Veracruz area, where a handful of Mexicans and some African allies defeated the French. The French had invaded Mexico, wanted to control Mexico and set up an empire there so they could aid the Confederates in the South. Okay, that was their intention. So by 1862, May the 5th, the French were delayed. And by January of 1863, and I'll get to that, I'll show you how our people ended slavery. It was too late, because in January of 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation allowed for the enrollment of Africans, descendants or enslaved people, into the Civil War. I'll come to that in a minute. Okay, let's move on to this American domestic enslavement trafficking. It's a very, very profitable business. People grow rich. Andrew Jackson is a dealer in 1811, what have you. The Bowies, you know, they have a place in Natchez, a club and a supply company, what have you, called Bowies. And when people that I interact with have a meeting and they hold it at Bowie, I don't go. You know, like other black folks sitting up there drinking, eating barbecue, laughing and grinning, what have you. And I have an associate that I spent 3 years with working on walking trails in Natchez, named John Holyoke. And John, I'm calling you out, John, for the good reason. John makes $200 a year donation to my annual Black and Blue Civil War program. I thought I'd there's some posters back there if you want. John says something about a meeting at Bowie, and I'm saying, I can't come. And he says, why? I say, Jim Bowie and all his family, residents and all of them, sold out people by the pound. Okay. I say, do you think the white folks of the Jewish religion will come to a restaurant saying Hitler? He said, oh, I guess not. So they understand why I don't come. Okay. So the domestic enslavement trafficking is supplying all of these folks. And one of the sites after Franklin and Armfield bring in enslaved people in their 4 ships. They are sailing out of 1315 Duke Street in Alexandria, stopping in Norfolk and other places, picking up other loads and charging people by the pound or by the numbers or what have you to bring them. They're bringing them to New Orleans. And then they're transshipped. Franklin sells some in New Orleans, and people get to go on the boat in New Orleans. This is where your term, a corner on the market, comes from, because they can go on and get some of the best choices and whatever. The rest of them is directed up the river by steamboat by that time. 1811, the steamboat is on the rivers and what have you. And they are destined to Natchez, to Franklin and Armfield Southern headquarters at the Forks of the Road. And so this is what I really, really like about the Forks of the Road from 1833, because in 1833, January, Franklin ships, and in some of the notes, I have the number of people, humans, and whole names and what have you, people who were shipped. And what happens, some of them have cholera when it gets to Natchez, and they die. And a cholera panic breaks out, and the city fathers pass an ordinance that bans the long-distance dealers, that is, those from outside of Mississippi. The local merchants and commissions and market houses and what have you could continue to sell. I got to find another term for that. They could continue to sell our ancestors and what have you. But the long-distance dealers had to get out of the city limits, and they relocated to an area called the Forks of the Road. So from April the 27, 1833 until the Civil War, the Forks of the Road operated as a huge, the second largest market for selling our ancestors in the Deep South. New Orleans was first. Okay, so you had these dealers from Maryland and you know the Meek brothers and Franklin and Armfield from Tennessee, who's in Alexandria. There's a whole list of them, and practically by now, it's you can go online and get some of these dealers because more than likely they have copied mine, my research, or somebody else. But how many of you read the story of Clotilde by William Wells Brown? William Wells Brown was enslaved and loaned to a slave trafficker, an enslavement trafficker named James Walker, and they operated out of St. Louis. And in that book, Clotilde, he talks about he was loaned by Brown was loaned by his enslaver to another set of enslaver who was a trafficker, and he talks about how they come down the Mississippi River from St. Louis and stop in different places, including Natchez, and eventually on to New Orleans. You can pick that up, and that'll give you an idea. Not only are they shipping them by ships, we're forced to walk from places like Richmond, Nashville, and Maryland, and those places down roughly 95 on the eastern seaboard and over on 10 to New Orleans. The Natchez Trace, which runs from Nashville right down through Tennessee and Mississippi to Natchez, and then from St. Louis and Randolph, Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri, and Louisville, Kentucky, Lafayette, Kentucky. No, that's Lexington, Kentucky, places like that. They're shipping down the river as such. Okay, sold down the river. So Walker's in St. Louis. Daniel Cox, White, William and Pogue, Pogue. I have the ads of them in Natchez saying that they're there. Joseph Biggs, you can see that Biggs on the exhibit over there. That's the ad that allowed the work that I was doing to have an inclusion in the National Park Service Underground Railroad Network to Freedom. Philip Hart, you can see most of this stuff on the internet, operating out of. Matter of fact, there's a picture on that exhibit, I think, where they're dressed in the men are dressed in black suits with plug hats, and the women are dressed in calico dresses and headdress. That's Philip Hart's operation down in New Orleans. Did you ask about Lynch? Somebody asked about Lynch. There's B.M. Lynch and John Lynch. They are on the south side of Pine, west of 15th in St. Louis, if those streets are still there. John Lynch is, Alfred B. McAfee and Blakey, they are at 93 Olive, if there's still an Olive Street. In John Mattingly, Mattingley, he is at the, let's see, where is he, real quick, and then we'll stop and deal with some questions. So I have to show you the Civil War piece as well. And while we're asking questions, I'll get ready. This is a John Mattingly ad on this end. 100 Negroes wanted. Having just returned from Kentucky, I wish to purchase 100 likely Negroes. Oh, I'm giving them credit. I'm speaking Spanish already. Consisting of men and women, boys and girls. No old folks like us. 25 is about the top of that. for which I will pay in cash for $50 to $100 more than any other trading man in the city of St. Louis or the state of Missouri. I can at all times be found at Bonham City Hotel, St. Louis, Missouri. And I have these notes to give to you to put a human face on them, especially the dealers. So James White operated, William White, they operated both in Lafayette County in Missouri. Samuel Wells, east side of Broadway, north of Chambers, if those streets are there. So anyway, you can have these notes if there's any of you who are interested in these particular notes. And I wish we had time, and we might do it in Professor Jack's or Professor McClinton class. I have some scripts that I write about for the Civil War. So the Forks of the Road operates after the ban by the city banning the long distance dealers to the outskirts of Natchez, and they concentrate in a place called the Forks of the Road, and they operate from 1833. You know, this hat took a beating coming up here packing, and it won't get right, but they operated at the Forks of the Road, the second largest enslavement market outside of New Orleans in the Southwest, the old Southwest, from 1833 up until the Civil War. The Union Army, the brother in the blue coat and brother in the gray coat, they finally go to battle, you know, over this thing called slavery and the expansion of slavery and what have you. They finally go to battle. I think they said the 1850 compromise was like that was the last straw, because they had fought each other, Missouri Compromise and all other kind of 1820 compromise. Politically, they had fought each other, and these power brokers in the slavery crash, in the mega slavery, they had enough. I think after the 1850 compromise, and what did that do? That allowed them to go to Canada and every place else and just snatch you and grab you wherever. So they went to war over this thing, and the South was kicking behind good, 1861, 1862, so good until Abraham Lincoln makes a decision politically and strategic-wise to pass to make a proclamation, the proclamation, Emancipation Proclamation, and it allowed blacks to join the Union Army, enslaved people and non-enslaved people. Some 200,000, to make this real short, some 200,000 enslaved people and black people, most of them enslaved people from the South, joined the Union Army as freedom fighters, and they decisively helped to defeat the South. They fought their masters, they killed their masters and their masters' people, anybody who looked like their masters' people that was a Confederate. Well, they fought them very handedly. This is another story, and so in October, I do another thing, because, like when I was at the high school this morning and thought, as soon as I said the word slavery, heads went down. We got to learn our history so we can hold our heads up, folks. It isn't just about slavery for us. So I'm going to stop, and I hope so that we can have dialogue, and I hope that you'll ask a question about this, and I'll be able to explain a little more to you. Javier?
Yes.
Okay, Xavier. Go ahead, man.
Let's go to check. My question is, I've known about the slave trade, however, I never knew about Natchez until Professor Jack's class this semester. About that, I know you said in your presentation that our history books, it's a little bit guided. How can we make that change to get the Forks of the Road, to get that out there, so that we may know our history and that we may have our heads up?
Okay, they tell me that you guys are experts on them gadgets. So much so until you be walking around. Okay, that's your media. The story, you got to research it. You got to dig. You got to be able to comprehend it. Are you raising your hand and saying how they can also do it? No, go ahead. Oh, okay. We have been doing the research. When I say we, people like Benny McRae on Lest We Forget, And of course, GoDaddy and stole that domain, and all that stuff that we had on there is no longer available to us. They want more money. Okay, but it's still out there. I deal with the Mississippi Valley. I don't go east to Gettysburg and Petersburg and those places, because our folks in the South, our folks achieve glory in the South much quicker than the folks in South Carolina who lost the fight in that whole thing. In June of 63, the 1st Mississippi Colored Infantry of the 9th Louisiana and the 11th Louisiana beat Texas Rangers behind at a place called Milliken Bend right across Vicksburg as part of the Vicksburg campaign. You got to study. It's there if you want to do that piece, because it's very important for us to have what we did to get rid of slavery and such. Man, we really achieved glory in the Mississippi Valley. The very first battle with the 2nd Louisiana Native Guard was in Pascagoula, Mississippi, and they defeated the Confederates. We defeated the Confederates and the 3rd U.S. Colored Cavalry. I have the script, and I can at least give that to you. The 3rd U.S. Colored Cavalry in December of 1864 did what no other Union Army, white or otherwise, could do. They captured the bridge over the Big Black River near Vaughan, Mississippi, and it cut off General Hood, the Confederates, who was aiming to attack the Union Army in Nashville to cut off the supply line to General Sherman, who really didn't like black people. But Sherman was wreaking havoc on the South going east to the Atlantic Ocean. All of this, the 3rd Colored Cavalry did most of the fighting in Mississippi. Beat L.S. Ross, who wound up being governor. L.S. Ross, take no niggas prison. That's what the history says. I'm quoting history now. That was his Ross's motto: take no black people prisons. Okay, and so if you were black and you were in a Union uniform like you were in Yazoo City, Mississippi, and you outnumbered and they're asking you to surrender, it's either death or fight. And so our people would fight to not only to the death, they would fight like tenacious animals and tigers and lions and what have you. And they would definitely did a good job on whooping the LSU Tigers and the Ole Miss Rebels. And now they have football games to commemorate what our people did to help build the society, to build the Mississippi, which helped the banking industry, Louisiana. They have a football game every January or something. What the football game commemorate cotton and sugar? What football game? The Cotton Bowl and the Sugar Bowl. Louisiana was the Sugar Bowl where sugar cane was growing, and of course Mississippi, Texas, and a few other places was the Cotton Bowl. So you get the picture. You got to do some serious research and study. Then you got to put on this uniform in Missouri, in Illinois, on this campus, and have a program every year that brings alive. We'll send you some scripts, but they're mainly the lower Mississippi Valley. Now, I was telling Professor Jack this morning that I wish I knew more about the units, particularly the white units that came from the Union Army from Illinois and Missouri, so that maybe you could talk to some of those people to come down and help us reenact in Mississippi night. We can't get one white person to play a Confederate and get his behind kicked in Mississippi, in Louisiana. We can't find one who is, truthful to the history, brave enough, liberal enough, whatever the case might, to help with us tell the story. So we have to invent straight from the record book. I can put a few words in black folks and white folks' mouth in the scripts. We can do that a little bit. Like, I play a man that's elder that was enslaved, who only gets one line in the history book. An old slave who showed Grant where to cross the Mississippi River from Louisiana to Mississippi, where there were good roads that allowed them to get up behind Vicksburg and force the Confederates into surrender. I'm the old man that showed Grant how to get up to Vicksburg so he could defeat them Confederates and give that key to President Lincoln. President Lincoln say Vicksburg is the key to the Civil War, and he want that Vicksburg key in his pocket. Now, ain't I a contraband hero? Ain't I a contraband hero? And it goes on and on, you know. So I give him more than one line in the history books and such. Okay. Next question? More questions? More comments? You got any questions, young lady? No? You just here. Huh? Yes, ma'am. How you doing?
I'm fine.
How you know?
Well, that's what you tell me.
Huh?
That's what my mama said.
Okay.
Tell me, how have you been treated and Forks of the Road exhibit been received since you've come back now and made it a national monument? How have your hometown treat you and treat the exhibit, welcome the exhibit?
They've never seen that exhibit in Natchez. Yeah, it was produced in New Orleans and sent straight to Purdue University. I hope it never gets back to Natchez, that you all will take it and keep it going. Because the Forks of the Road was designed to bring the story to you, and the brochures that I have were designed to try to get people to come down to the Forks of the Road. If I'd been in California, I would have done, the Forks of the Road would have massive museums, interpretive centers, tons of people coming, and whatever the case might be. But number one, white folks down there in Mississippi, Louisiana, what have you, don't want a black person. Matter of fact, I don't know where they want a black person telling them what to do. When I was in California, I had PhDs working for me, and they were white males, and they really didn't want anything coming from me. They didn't want to take instruction from me. You know, they might do it and pimp it and what have you, but in real reality, number one, they're hard-headed. You can't tell them anything. Number two, they don't want to talk about slavery. Number three, they will tell me, I agree with what you're doing, but I don't like the way you're doing it. It ain't your call. It is not your call. And so I keep going. Yeah, that's been resistant, but more and more, you know, the rewards are, because I do it voluntarily and I don't have grants and things, the rewards are when you see a person as old as I am saying, we didn't know about this until you come along. They didn't teach us this in school or what have you, and they are crying almost, you know, sort of like when I was crying when I was going through what we had done as an African people, you know, and I would be up at 4 o'clock in the morning reading something with Abbott Churchward or some of these old white Masons who in the 1890s were looking for Solomon's, you know, wisdom and what have you, and they went all over the world and they coded stuff. But it kept taking them back to the Nile Valley and what have you. And that's how it helped me to know that the science, the spiritual science in Cahokia and other places are African, because they coded the same terminologies and the same, you don't get the same, although I met the whites who function out of the left hemisphere, they segregate. You know, European thinking is mainly, and teaching is mainly segregated. The department of this, the department of that, the department of that, and they don't really talk to each other and don't relate. But in the African way, you got to go out of the right side of the brain so you can see the whole picture. But the European will take departments and try to turn them into wholes or parts from the whole picture, the bigger picture, and try to make wholes out of them. So that's another struggle for you as a history person, anybody studying what have you. So I want to see if there's another question, because I can, you know, you can see when the questions get me going. I love it. And so in Natchez, it's been a fight for 21 years, and all we've been able to do is get one site preserved down there. The Park Service is trying to get their hands on it now. The U.S. Senator Thad Cochran has a appropriation in this year's appropriation that starts October the 1st that if it passes, it would allow the Park Service to own land at the Forks of the Road and give them about $250,000 to try to buy some other sites or what have you. So, you know, it's been a long, hard time, and I still haven't been able to move to Africa. I didn't tell you that I came home to move out of America and move to Africa. I was able to go there when I filmed this or what have you. But for 21 years now, I'm still stuck in America. I still want to go. I feel the ancestors kind of releasing me a little bit. You know, more and more people, SIUE is embracing the folks. I had to read you. I had to read your T-shirt. Is embracing the folks of the road and pushing the story. You know, Professor Jacks, Jessica, and the other folks who came down. They made the mistake and say, "What can I do to help?" And so you see the results. I'm here, the exhibits here, and what have you. That's a fight. That's a struggle. But we've laid the groundwork for Javier to do his work.
We probably have time for one more question, I think. and then
Oh, boy.
we wrap it up. Is there one last question?
Yes, ma'am.
It's a little off topic, but like, have you traced your genealogy?
I'm not interested in genealogy. Not until they do better to get you past a common gene pool in West Africa or some other part of it. If they can get it to a specific, nail it down specifically, I might be. I'm not even interested in genealogy, and that's not true. I just don't have the time to play that game. And people in genealogy tend to think that it's a private deal for their family. There were no private deals during slavery time. Everybody knew everything. Even if you're jumping in bed with slave master, everybody knew it. So I need the information to build a bigger picture. That's what I'm interested in. Okay?
Thank you all very
All
much
right.
for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.